Hi everyone, welcome to the session, The Private Sector, Water and Climate Resilience in Uncertain Times, Collective Action. I'm Neha Madanasthana, representing IKEA as co-convener of the session. As we are all aware, collective action is a key component of water stewardship. Water-related collective action can be challenging and time-intensive, but there are lessons to be learned from work in river basins around the world on how to create successful, inclusive, and impactful collective action initiatives. By leveraging multiple stakeholders from different sectors and skill sets, collective action projects can have greater positive water impact than one company or one entity acting alone. Today, we have the opportunity to listen from our speakers, both from the NGO perspective and the corporate perspective. They'll be sharing their experience engaging in water-related collective action through examples and share key successes, challenges, and lessons learned from those efforts. Second part of the session today will be a panel discussion, where you will have the opportunity to interact with the panelists representing industry who will be answering to your questions. I would like to encourage participants to ask your questions throughout the session through the chat function on Panel. We will address these questions during dedicated time for Q&A at the end. Anything we don't answer during the session, speakers can come back with the answers post-session. I'm really delighted to introduce our guest speakers of the day. We have three of them. Our first speaker for today are Barry Liner from Water Environment Federation and Scott Eccles representing ZDHC. Barry is the Chief Technical Officer of the Water Environment Federation, responsible for leading innovation and resource recovery initiatives globally. He is facilitator for the Unleash SDG Innovation Lab. He has worked with water stakeholders in government, utilities, private industry, academia, and international agencies in over a dozen countries over the past 30 years. Scott is Senior Director for the ZDHC Roadmap to Zero program, coordinating all focus areas and driving program delivery. Scott is an expert in environmental analytical chemistry and textile chemistry with over 30 years of experience. Next speaker for today is Cora Kemiar from Pacific Institute. Cora is a senior researcher at the Pacific Institute, where she works on corporate water stewardship, integrated water management, California water policy, and more. Much of her work supports the CU Water Mandate and the California Water Action Collaborative. After hearing presentations from Barry, Scott, and Cora, we will turn it over to Tom Williams, Director of Water for WBCSD, to introduce our panel speaker and moderate that discussion. I'm here to get out of the way as quickly as possible, and your job is to listen, enjoy, and put questions in the chat. Over to you, Scott.
Thank you very much, Nia, for that introduction, and thanks to World Water Week for inviting us to give our perspective, because the title of this session is around collective action, and I think we all know that some challenges are really just too big for any one company to take on alone. And about 10 years ago, almost exactly 10 years ago now, there was the Greenpeace Detox campaign, which pointed out the very difficult challenge of managing chemicals in a broad global supply chain, and how that can impact the people and the environments around where the production is occurring, but also the consumers and the end products through the chemicals that might be used. And early on, the brands realized that we had to do this together. We had to collaborate together. We had to do it in a transparent way, and everyone had to make a commitment to address this challenge. And so what came out of that challenge, if we go to the next slide, was the ZDHC collaboration. And it started as 6 brands in 2011, and it's grown to over 160 stakeholders throughout the textile and footwear supply chains. And it includes the brands, retailers, the chemical industry, the producers, the people that are actually making the products, a lot of the solution providers, and a lot of our partner groups that are also working on these initiatives. And in 2015, it became a foundation. We've grown to over 40 people within the foundation itself, but the real work of the foundation is through how our contributors help shape the guidelines that we're producing. If you go on to the next slide, we really take a holistic approach to the management of chemicals in the supply chain and how to improve and use better chemistry in the supply chain. We look at the inputs, so we look at the chemicals that are used. We have a manufacturing restricted substances list that prevents those chemicals from ever being used in the first place. We look at the processes that go on and how the chemicals are used in the facilities, how they're stored in the facilities. But also, and most relevant to this session, is we look at the outputs. So we look at the wastewater, and we've created the first overall wastewater guidelines for the industry that include not only the conventional parameters that you think of, such as color and pH and the oxygen demand, but also looking at those chemicals that are banned from use and are those occurring in the wastewater. And we really feel that's important to verify what's happening upstream to find out whether these chemicals are being phased out. So we've created a holistic approach around wastewater as well. We have a sampling plan how to take wastewater. We have wastewater guidelines, which really raise the bar and try to challenge people to move from a foundational level of just kind of compliance, which still goes beyond legal compliance, but to progressive and aspirational levels of water treatment. We have water treatment technologies guidance, which helps people understand what technologies might help improve their processes. We also have a data reporting system, because one of the challenges is that brands and retailers may all be asking different things of the facilities that are making the products. And what we want to do is align that so that everybody's asking the same question, everybody's asking for the same information on wastewater, and not only that, be able to share it. So if I'm a facility taking a wastewater sample, I can now take that wastewater sample, upload the results to what we call our wastewater module on our gateway, and then that can be shared among the brands so that they only have to do the sampling once and they can share it. They can create a report called the Clearstream report, which is a report card on their wastewater that they can share with the brands that they're working with. And that's great to a point, but that only gets us to the point where we know what's going on. We really want to work on improvements. And if we go to the next slide, one of the clear things we saw that needed improvement and that needs information is making sure that the wastewater treatment system operators have some minimum qualifications in this industry. So we created a wastewater treatment system qualification guidelines that we will be using to help train facilities, but also brands and retailers can use that to assess whether the facilities that they're working with have trained operators. Now, it's great to come up with all of this guidance and roll it out, but it really, again, is the implementation. And guidance is no good, and the qualifications list is no good unless there is a way to then get that information to the people that need it and actually provide them with the training. Now, ZDHC is great at collaboration. We're great at bringing people together, but we're not the experts in training people for how to treat wastewater. And this problem has been apparent for many, many years. And here's a favorite article that some of our contributors have seen all the way back to the 1950s. But we want to work with and collaborate with folks like WEF to help us implement this training, because they have the tools that can actually enable people to meet the guidelines for qualifications that we've set out there. And I'll let Barry tell you a little bit more about this intersection of how we've created some guidelines, but they really have some tools that enable people to pick those guidelines up and implement them.
Thank you very much, Scott. Yes, so in that previous slide, you may have noticed that there was a quote in there that said the technology of water treatment has advanced to keep pace with the exacting demands of dyers, only to fail in many cases at its point of application. And that's from actually 1957. So the need for capacity building has been recognized for many years. And the other piece of this is when the focus was on the dyes or the special chemicals, you know, a lot of that got under control, but some of the basic wastewater treatment and management processes were actually where we really needed to focus on in capacity development. So about a couple of years ago, ZDHC and the Water Environment Federation started working together to take the existing training that the Water Environment Federation has on wastewater treatment and then look to see how we can roll that out throughout the textile supply chain. And we focused on a couple of areas, and the training materials were already available in English, and then were translated into Spanish as well. Looking at where the manufacturing is in the supply chain, we worked with ZDHC members to create, to translate that into Mandarin and Vietnamese. So as a starting point to start making sure that we can roll this out is through part of a longer term program, which you'll see on the next slide as we move forward to that. So about Nike, one of the ZDHC members funded the translation into Mandarin and Vietnamese of the training materials, which was step one, and we've started rolling that out throughout ZDHC and the member companies of ZDHC. The next stage that we'll be working on in partnership is training delivery, both in person and online. And we're in the phase of rolling that out right now. And then as part of that, we're moving into a credentialing program where ZDHC is evaluating creating a certificate to basically enhance the profile and professionalism of skilled operators worldwide in the textile supply chain. And so this is part of the plan. Great opportunity for collaboration between brands, between industry and nonprofits, and working globally to address these problems. And this has already been, this approach, while we're still in the middle of it, has already been identified as a potential pathway for other industries, including the pharmaceutical industry, that we are in early stages of discussing similar kind of approaches. So really appreciate the opportunity to share this story of partnership, and I look forward to hearing from the rest of the participants on their journeys. Thank you.
Thanks, Barry and Scott, for those presentations. Hi, everyone. My name is Cora. I'm with the Pacific Institute. For those not familiar with the Pacific Institute, we are a California-based nonprofit organization, and since 1987, we have worked with everyone from Fortune 500 companies to disenfranchised communities to create and advance solutions to the world's most pressing water challenges. Since 2007, we have acted as co-secretariat of the UN Global Compact CEO Water Mandate, which is a global commitment platform for corporate water stewardship with 200 endorsing companies. Today, I'm going to talk about an example of water stewardship collective action here in California. Next slide. So as some background, California has always experienced periods of drought and water scarcity as a semi-arid region, and California's water systems over the past century have become highly engineered and human influenced. I think that settlers of California always dreamed it to be a wetter place than it really was, and built massive infrastructure projects to get water supplies needed to support huge population and economic growth. And today, California's water system supports a population of 40 million residents and almost 10 million acres of irrigated agriculture. Next slide. As you may have seen in the news, California is again in a severe drought along with most of the Western United States. With climate change driving higher temperatures, melting snowpacks, and more erratic precipitation patterns, we're seeing increased water extremes, from historic drought to historic flood and back again, which presents new and serious challenges for California water managers. On top of that, we face compounding challenges of freshwater ecosystem decline, wildfire risk, sea level rise, and more. Next slide. In 2014, an unlikely coalition of NGOs and corporations came together to address these challenges as the California Water Action Collaborative, which we call QUAC. The idea for QUAC was born out of a CEO water mandate meeting in Los Angeles at the height of California's last big drought. Several attendees of that meeting, from multinational food and beverage companies to leading environmental organizations, expressed a desire to better understand California's water challenges, identify geographies and issues of shared interest, and collaborate to make a positive impact on water security in the state. Next slide. QUAC began as a casual working group and now, 5 years later, has evolved into a formal network of over 28 organizations who are learning from experts and one another and partnering together for collective impact on innovative solutions and to improve water resilience across California. QUAC members collaborate on joint stewardship projects, they set shared goals, we have monthly group calls and biannual in-person meetings. When we could meet in person, we would explore a different California watershed during those twice yearly meetings, as you can see in the photo here up in Northern California. Next slide. Over time, QUAC's approach to collective action has matured from more opportunistic to more strategic. We have 3 regional working groups in the urban San Francisco Bay Area and South Coast and the agricultural Central Valley. This funnel diagram on the slide helps guide our project selection process. We start with the key water challenges we want to address in a given region, consider other benefits of interest, account for the logistical and financial factors influencing project implementation, pick preferred implementation categories and principles, and then pursue opportunities that align with those parameters. Next slide. So now QUAC has a portfolio of about a dozen collective action projects across the state, from headwaters to farms to cities. And you can see some examples of those types of projects listed here on the slide. In addition to implementing these collective action projects, we track the outcomes of this work against 6 water-related goals seen here on the colorful boxes on the screen. And these are aligned with Sustainable Development Goal 6 on water. It's exciting and powerful to see the cumulative impact of these combined efforts over the years. In closing, here are 4 takeaways that I've gotten from participating in QUAC over the years. First is that companies can work together in a pre-competitive environment to have positive water impacts. Second is that although collective action can be more difficult and complex than individual companies working independently, it can also produce more impacts and better outcomes. Third, it's critical to understand the local water and watershed context and prioritize water challenges to address before developing and investing in collective action projects. And fourth and last, having standardized goals and metrics can help a collective group like this direct its efforts in a common direction. Thank you all for listening, and I will now pass the virtual mic to my colleague, Tom Williams, Water Director for WBCSD.
Great, thank you, Cora, and thank you also to Barry and Scott. If you have any questions for Cora, Barry, and Scott, please do post them in the chat section on the Pathwell platform. Don't try and post them here on Zoom. Go to Pathwell platform, find the chat box and put your question in there, and I'll take them up as part of this panel discussion. We have 2 panel speakers for you now to dig into some more aspects of collective action. We have Naima from PepsiCo and Miguel from Orbia. I will let them introduce themselves and their companies in a moment. Like with many World Water Week sessions, we want to make this as interactive as possible. So please do post your questions on Pathable and I'll pick them up. We've got about 30 minutes or so for this panel discussion, and we'll bring in Barry, Scott and Cora a little bit later on as well. Okay, let's kick off with some intros and start with Nima. So Nima, please introduce yourself, your company, and a high-level overview of the relationship of water with your company.
Yes, thank you, Tom. Good day, everyone, given the different time zones. So I'm Nima Dansera, and I work for PepsiCo on the Frito-Lay side of our business, which is our snack side of our business. And I'm located in Plano, Texas. And I've been with the company a little over 2.5 years. And I lead our water program for North America on the Frito-Lay side of the business. So focused mainly on plant water ops efficiency, so reducing water in our manufacturing facilities, and also water stewardship, so external collaboration and making sure that we're driving our water stewardship agenda externally, right? So for those of you who are not familiar with PepsiCo, we are among the largest food and beverage company in the world, right? So we manufacture brands like Pepsi, Gatorade, Tropicana, and also from on the snack side, like Lay's, Dorito, Quaker Oats, just to name a few, right? So as a food and beverage company, for us, water is a key component of our operations, right? Starting from the start, from agriculture, the raw materials that we use to making our products, to manufacturing, and even to the delivery part of our business. So because of that, we know that we have to play a part in making sure that we are mitigating water challenges in the local communities where we operate, right? So it's a very key business imperative, and it's important for us to conserve that natural resource. So with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to Miguel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Miguel Arenas. I am leading the Challenge for Sustainability and HS&E in Orbia Group. My specific responsibility is in the chemical business, when water is really important topic for all groups. So right now I am in Santiago, Chile, but you know, that is changing in the time. So maybe soon I will be in another part of the world.
Great, Nima and Miguel, great to have you with us on this panel discussion today. So Nima, starting with you, we've heard about sector-based and geography-based collective action in those two presentations. So one from the textile sector and one focusing on California. I mean, what does collective action mean to you at PepsiCo? And can you give an example where you have seen collective action really move the needle on water stewardship?
Yes, definitely. So for us, to begin with, we've been doing sustainability and water and reduction in our manufacturing facilities for a very long time, and even in our supply chain, right? So over time, given the water challenges, especially in areas that we call high water risk. So PepsiCo, every 3 years, we do an analysis that looks at water risk in where we operate, right, in all of our manufacturing facilities globally. And based on that, we have identified over 100 of our facilities located in what we call high water stress areas. And we realized that just focusing on our operation is not going to move the needle, right? Because at the end of the day, for us, making sure that we're mitigating those water challenges is important for business continuity, right? And water, we've had many times that water challenges are local. And because of that, we've realized that it's very important to work in that external space and pre-competitive environment, meaning working with other food and beverage companies, other industries, and environmental groups to make sure that we're coming together to understand what the water challenges are where we are, and then understand what our part is in contributing to those challenges and what we can do to mitigate those challenges as well, right? So a very good example is in Quack, right, in California. So because I'm in North America and I sit in Frito-Lay, so in North America, we have become, we are part of the Quack, the California Water Action Collaborative. And through Quack, we've been able to understand a lot of the water challenges in California, right? And then understand the complexity of water supply in California, as most of you know. And from that, we've also built meaningful relationships, both with other companies and environmental groups, and have participated in very impactful water projects in those geographies, right? And for us, collective action, this is where it becomes really geographical, right? So even though I'm on Frito-Lay, but when we started looking at collective action, for all of our different business units that are within that geography, we come together and work with other companies externally, right? So a very good example of a project is we partnered with Abu Dhabi Foundation in California through the Quack organization. That's where we met in Abu Dhabi Foundation, and partnered in, invested in a project, which basically is called the California Wildfire Restoration, where we invested in planting trees in that San Joaquin Valley area. And based on our investment, we are basically looking forward to replenishing over 400 million gallons of water in that watershed. So, and that is including many other opportunities that we've partnered with other companies in that geographies, and also many globally.
Great, thanks, Nima. And you mentioned pre-competitive engagement, which is something that Cora mentioned, and one of the, I guess, best descriptions of what this means, because maybe not everybody on the webinar is conversant with this kind of language, is pre-competitive engagement is about working across shared value chains to raise the floor, standards, norms, and behaviors, whereas competition is about raising the ceiling through competitive advantage. So I think that's a nice way to illustrate the difference between pre-competitive engagement and competitive engagement. So thanks, Nima. We'll come back to you. Miguel, a lot of the key drivers we see for collective action on water is focused on quantity. However, quality is important, and we heard this with the ZDHC presentation, for example. What are some of the examples of collective action around industrial wastewater that you have been involved in?
Yeah, right now in Orbia, in specific in the chemical business, we would like to don't use new water. That is the focus. So we have different examples in Latin America and North America that try to create some synergy or symbiosis with other company or with the city. If we are close to the city, for example, that is it's really common in some side, some chemical plant are ready to some area, and after the city is coming. So we are working with the city, for example, in Mexico for use the black water of the city for putting in our process. So when back the water is better than when we receive the water. So I think so is really good example, because in the past we are using only, let me tell you, like clean water or only one use water, but right now we are trying to do the opposite of that, and the synergy that we are working with the city, and let me tell you, with other companies too, because we are not alone in this challenge. It's really important maybe in the last 5 years.
Great, thanks, Miguel. And I think this collaboration between industry and local authorities is such an untapped opportunity, particularly when we think of industrial wastewater, reuse potential, sharing services and infrastructure with municipalities. We heard about the partnerships you can create for knowledge transfer between industry and municipal operators in the ZDHC presentation. But I think there's a whole spectrum of collaboration activities between industry and local authorities on these kinds of things that we could be tapping into. Nima, back to you, and same question to you, Miguel, after Nima. Now, if you were advising a company that hadn't previously embarked on collective action, they were unsure of how to get started, they were a little bit uncertain of what the outcomes would be around water stewardship, what would you tell them to get them started? What would your advice be in terms of getting started on collective action?
Yeah, good question. So I always go back to the saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, right? So to me, that's what collective action is, right? So if you really want to move the needle, you have to work with all the relevant stakeholders where you operate, right? Because as I said, water is a local challenge, right? And we've seen that in many places globally, right? So for us, PepsiCo, when, for example, I think this might be a good approach for others to consider if they're thinking about doing collective action or even water stewardship in general, right? When we expanded our water goals externally, right, we decided to adopt the Alliance for Water Stewardship Standard. So I don't know if a lot of people are familiar with that, but it's really a global framework that provides a guideline on how to go about water stewardship, right? So there is a very detailed requirement, what they call criteria or indicators within that standard that basically tells you what you need to do to engage stakeholders externally and how to go about water stewardship. So I really think that's a good way to start if you're really trying to figure out how to go about doing collective action. So it's a framework that can give you that guidance.
Yeah, fantastic, Nima. And I think the AWS standard is sort of the first go-to framework that companies should look at. And there's a whole range of other tools and frameworks. Companies have been on this journey for a number of years now, so don't be afraid to
definitely.
Frameworks. Great, Miguel, over to you. If you were advising a company that was really wanting to get engaged in collective action, what advice would you give?
Yeah, similar that we are talking with Nina. I think so that the key of the challenge is working together with the stakeholder, with the community. We are in some part when the water is not arriving to all people, for example. So we are, let me tell you, like a double challenge, like the production, because it's necessary for our process. Try to don't use the water, but share the water too is other challenge. So in this line, they're working together for find solutions for all the community is for me is the vision and the final. That will, for this reason we are doing that we are doing right now. But yeah, I see so that for me is the key.
Great, and if any of the audience have questions for Nima and Miguel, do post them in the Pathable chat. I'm going to invite Barry and Cora to join the panelists because I see there's a few questions coming through on Pathable based on their presentation. So I'm going to first start with some questions coming in for Quack, Cora, with you, and then I'll move on to Scott and Barry on ZDHC. So a couple of questions maybe to take together, Cora, on Quack. First from Sarah. The sort of governance arrangement you have for Quack, if you could just describe that. And then the second question from Colin, what is the engagement with government in Quack? And does the initiative have a sustainable business model beyond the support or the companies involved?
Yes, happy to answer those. So to the first question around governance, Quack is facilitated by a neutral NGO party that helps coordinate meetings and do some of the practical logistical facilitation, but also help guide the discussion in the direction of Quack. And then there is a 6-person steering committee that is really the decision-making body of Quack, and that is made up of 3 NGO Quack members and 3 corporate members, and there are terms for that steering committee and people rotate on and off of them. So that's the primary mechanism for governance. And then decisions to bring new Quack members into the fold is open to all members. All members have say in bringing additional members into the group. In terms of the second question around government involvement and the Quack business model, perhaps I'll answer the business model question first because it does relate to this governance model. So all Quack members contribute financially to be able to support the facilitation services, to host meetings, to do all of the the practical pieces of hosting a collaborative. And then in terms of project investments, Most, if not all, quack projects are co-funded. So it's not just corporate contributions, but also contributions from other sectors, including state and local and national governments. And then that leads me to the next piece of that question, which is government involvement. So governments cannot be members of quack, but we do have a few allies, we call them. So for example, the United States Forest Service is an ally of quack, and we work with them on forest restoration and mountain meadow restoration projects. They've been a really great partner. And then we also frequently have guest speakers attend quack meetings to have a discussion, to present on topical issues. And that has included the California Department of Water Resources, the California Natural Resource Agency. So there is involvement and engagement with government, but they're not quack members.
Great, thanks for that, Cora. And maybe I could leave you with a question to think about whilst I go to Scott, Cora. That is around the replicability of what you've been doing through quack. So if there was somebody on the line today which was in a completely different geography, somewhere in Asia, Africa, for example, which had some maybe similar problems, maybe some different challenges, what would you say from the quack framework is replicable for other geographies? Any key learnings that any geography could take on board? Be interesting to get your insight on that in a moment. But first, let's go to Scott. And there was a question from Sophie. Scott, I see you answered it on Pathable, but for the benefit of those who maybe are not on there, you could just come online and respond to it. So the question was, how do you deal with emerging substances such as nanomaterials, for example, for which there is no regulation yet? So Scott, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really good question, and it's one that the textile and footwear industry has been challenged with, because if you think about most of the regulations are on final products, and there's a wide variation in the global regulations that are out there around chemicals. And so early on, we recognized where we really needed to stop the chemical use is at the manufacturing stage, to keep the chemicals out of the facilities to begin with. And so our manufacturing restricted substances list was created to do that. But it was designed to be a living document, recognizing that people are finding out information all the time about different chemicals, and you mentioned nanomaterials. And so the manufacturing restricted substances list has a component that we've built a submission platform where anyone can submit suggestions for compounds that should be added to the MRSL, and they submit that with information about the hazard, the usage patterns that they're aware of, alternatives, safer alternatives that might be available. And then that information goes to what we call our MRSL Advisory Council. So it's an independent group of experts that reviews that information and then makes a recommendation back to ZDHC as to whether we should add that compound to our MRSL. So in that way, the MRSL stays up to date. Obviously, if there's anything with regard to regulations on chemicals, we address that. We can address that in a fast manner. But we really built the document to be able to be updated and go through this regular process to make sure that it stays up to date.
Super, Scott. Thank you for that. And before I go back to Cora, I just want to pick up one question here from Sophie, which was talking about any concrete examples of building a decentralized water treatment plant by a few companies in a specific geographical area, partly financed by the corporates themselves. There are some good examples. There's one in Durban, where a number of private companies have come together to reuse industrial wastewater. And one example I use quite often is actually in Sao Paulo. It's a project called Aquapolo. I think at the time it was the largest water reuse facility in South America. It was co-financed by Sabesp, which many will know is the public utility in Sao Paulo, and Braskem, which is the industrial partner in Sao Paulo. And effectively, it provided industry, including Braskem and others, with reused municipal water. A key factor for me in terms of what made that successful was that Braskem signed a 41-year contract with the reuse facility that they would actually pay and receive reused water for 41 years. And I think that kind of long-term commitment is super important to sort of underline the financial viability of such projects. So that's just a couple I have on front of mind from Durban and Sao Paulo. I'll try and pop a couple of links in the chat so you can read more about those, and encourage anybody else on the panel to come forward if they have other good examples. Cora, I want to come back to you both on the question that I asked, and there's another one has come in since we last spoke, which is about how projects are prioritized within QUAC and who oversees them. So a little bit on the replicability of the QUAC model, and then on the project selection and oversight.
Sure, happy to speak to that. And it looked like maybe Miguel had something to say about decentralized wastewater treatment, so perhaps we can come back to him on that. But in terms of replicability, this is certainly something that we've been thinking about now that QUAC is 5 years old, and what are the opportunities to scale up or replicate this model. I do think that a lot of components are quite replicable in terms of the governance structure and the collaboration structure, and then the metrics that we're using to track progress, as I mentioned in my presentation, are quite aligned with Sustainable Development Goal 6, and I don't think that they are particularly specific to California. Of course, which of the metrics are most important will depend on what region you're in, but I think that metrics framework is also replicable. And we are beginning to see some of the pieces of QUAC get replicated in other parts of the country, at least. For example, there was just recently launched a Texas Water Action Collaborative, and I think that is an example of trying to take some of those successful pieces of QUAC and replicate them in a different state within the United States. And then within California, there is increasing interest in the Colorado River Basin, which is an important source watershed for California, but of course is a distinct region with its own water challenges and water governance issues. And I could also see the QUAC model start to scale and replicate more broadly within the Colorado River Basin as well. And beyond the United States, there are a lot of great collective action projects and collaboratives around the world that certainly QUAC could probably learn from. And I think some of the components that have been successful in QUAC could be replicated there as well. And then to the question about projects, this is a great question. And I think it's important to understand that QUAC, when it comes to actual project implementation, is pretty decentralized. And so it's the individual implementing NGOs who are overseeing the project. There's no project governance within QUAC. It's more about governance of the collaborative, and then projects are done individually with on-the-ground partners. Of course, many of these implementing partners are QUAC members, but there's no oversight of those individual projects at the collaborative level.
Great, thank you, Cora. And Miguel, did you want to come back in on those examples of wastewater treatment?
We have a different example, honestly. I remember where you comment in with Braskem, and we have some opportunity in Cartagena, in Colombia. The chemical park there create the synergy between company, because that is the opportunity in the chemicals in general around the world. Chemical parks are not so extreme. So when we talk about synergy with water, we can create many connections in the chemical park. So in this case, for example, we are working with a concrete company and another company that need different water quality. Let me tell you like that. So we are creating a really good synergy, and we have a planning reduction of 50%. So it's really good project. And also, let me tell you, other great one is negative water for us in Mexico, in Guadalajara. It's a project with the city. So right now, one of our plans is water negative, let me tell you like that. So because we are using the black water of the city. So that is 2 examples for that.
Great, thanks, Miguel. More questions coming in. Cora, I'll come to you in a second on this question around the alignment of the work you're doing with subnational or national reporting, just to see if that's anything is on your radar in that regard. But I just want to address this question from Sanjeev and see if anybody wants to come in from the panel on this. So some organizations and coalitions are doing good work, but overall the industry still has a very long way to go on wastewater treatment. What is the biggest barrier to accelerating progress and making industry part of the solution on water quality? So I'll leave this question there, and maybe one of the panelists wants to come back to that. But Cora, I'll come over to you and on this question of alignment with subnational or national reporting on SDG 6.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. It's a great question and something that has been on my radar personally. It's not something that we've been able to accomplish yet. We did a few years ago have a conversation with the California Department of Water Resources when they were developing some of their water planning materials and looking at metrics to track progress. And in an ideal world, it would be great if that aligned better with SDG 6 or directly. It's not, they all conceptually align, but to be able to actually connect that to the reporting mechanisms, I think, is the goal. And this ability to kind of roll up, from the ground up to the national level, I think would be amazing. We're not there yet, but I think this is partly why we wanted to make sure that the metrics did align, so that once that opportunity arises, it's we're able to hopefully plug those in relatively easily, but we're not quite there yet.
Great, thanks, Cora. So coming back to this industry action on wastewater, and before I ask the panelists to step in if they've got some insights, I mean, from my perspective, one of the key triggers, if you like, is around externalities. So if companies would start to internalize externalities caused by wastewater pollution, so this could be environmental, social, economic externalities, I think that will be a strong incentive for industry action. Now, if you look at many jurisdictions and the penalties and fines that they have for non-compliance, unfortunately, many businesses see those relatively low costs as a cost of doing business. They really aren't a deterrent for stopping further polluting activities, for example. So I really do think a key trigger will be for internalizing externalities and putting all the policies and regulations in place to do that. And if there are strong policy government signals to do this, I think industry will respond. But let me hand over to any of the panelists if they have anything further to add on that point. Please just unmute and go away.
Hey, yeah, thanks, Tom. One of the things I would say is, following on your point, I think a lot of it comes down to the regulatory environment, because I think what you're seeing with, for example, the ZDHC example is when is industry taking the lead in some areas that actually don't have the regulatory environment and have the teeth in that. So they're actually forcing the issue. So I think it's very difficult to identify one single biggest challenge, but I do think the baseline regulatory environment and making it important to address the wastewater is critical to drive that.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with those sentiments. And one thing that we noticed, and that's apparent in the textile industry that people may not be aware of, is most textile suppliers don't just serve one brand or one retailer, they're serving multiple manufacturers. And so critical to our industry was having people align on what the expectations are and the outcomes and sharing that information, because you rewind 10 years ago and you would have 5 different brands going to the same supplier and asking for 5 slightly different approaches on what their expectations were for wastewater. And so part of what ZDHC has really tried to do is to simplify things for the suppliers so that they've got one source of a standard, and then they can take that to all their suppliers, and getting the brands to stop asking for slightly different expectations from the suppliers and aligning has been critical in our industry.
Great, thank you, Barry and Scott. One last question for the panelists to sort of muse on. Scott, you just spoke about looking 10 years back, and I wonder if the panelists look 10 years forward, and collective action has made a significant, meaningful contribution to attaining SDG 6. Where do we put our efforts to make sure that collective action works? Where would you really like us to see us raise the bar, put in more resources, engage better, more? Where would you advocate to put the attention around collective action as we move forward to make sure it does make that meaningful contribution to SDG 6? So if anyone wants to step up forward first, just unmute your mic and speak away.
I can go ahead and take a first stab at that. It's a great question, Tom, and thank you for that. Two of the things that I think I've been focused on the most in order to scale up are co-investment strategies, and with that, looking at projects that provide multiple benefits so that you can bring more investors that are interested in different things together on a project. And I think a big piece of that is not only looking within the corporate water stewardship space, but looking at other funding sources. I mean, if you look at the investments that governments, for example, are making in water projects or water related projects, you know, the scale of those investments just hugely outweigh the scale of corporate investments right now. And so we need to be able to leverage both of those sources together. And I know that the companies that we work with are really interested in that, and how do they leverage the corporate funds that they can contribute to have greater impact. And I think that everyone likes to talk about, you know, co-investment strategies, but some of the practicalities and the logistics of how do you actually bring those different sources of funding together really vary based on your locality, and there's still a lot of the logistics to work out there. And so I would like to see more work on those strategies and bringing in multiple investors with different interests and different benefits to scale up these multi-benefit projects. And I think that that's the only way that we're going to get to, you know, beyond these, you know, pilot scale initiatives that are really promising, but in the grand scheme of things are not making a big enough impact. So I will say that. And then I will just say, you know, one of the important things about QUAC to me, and one of the key elements of success that I didn't mention in my presentation, is really this relationship aspect and the importance of building relationships and this, you know, trusted environment for collaboration. And unfortunately, that's something that's difficult to scale up quickly, but I do think that it's a really important ingredient for collective action.
Great, thank you, Cora. A great call to action, very clear. Nima, I saw you unmuting. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think Cora put it really nice. I was just going to say that, and just not looking at water as a standalone problem, right? So looking at the water climate nexus, right? I think that will take us a long way, right? And then I think I had someone else talk about, hey, the problems with water is long term, right? And a lot of us living in North America, right? I think that's really true. We may not be facing pressing challenges right now, but it's long term. So I think if we start now trying to build those collaborations and collective action, it will go a long way. And I think we also need to bring other participants in collective action, right? So like, for example, water regulators, right? So municipalities, because I think there is sometimes, I don't want to call it conflict, but I think, you know, us wanting to reduce water sometimes can affect revenues for other entities, right? So we really need to figure out how do we make this a big, like, create a bigger picture where at the end of the day, knowing that collective action can try to provide a more better watershed health and protect the water resources that, let's say, for example, municipalities rely on to get water supply. And also long term, if we preserve the quality of the water, eventually it will reduce the investment that they have to make to clean the water and get it to their suppliers. So I think we need to bring more people on the table, and not just organizations like us that, you know, want to mitigate water risk, to make sure that there's enough supply long term to keep our business running.
Fantastic, thank you, Nima. Barry, Scott, Miguel, last chance for any last words with you around collective action, any guidance, advice, expectations, or hopes?
Go
Miguel,
ahead, Mike.
after you, and then Scott.
No, whatever. Okay. Oh no, yeah. I'm thinking that the same conversation that two points for me are really important. One, we talk a lot about regulation, but in some countries, regulation have other priorities. So we need to be clear with that. Is what it is a global challenge. In the company, we can put energy because it's I think it's a must, right? We know that some country. I talked some example in Latin America where the water is a challenge, but not a priority because the focus of the governmental maybe is in other line. It's connected maybe with the water, but it's not so clear. So I just saw the opportunity of the water is really important. And maybe the company will have the responsibility for put this topic in the top. So the other about the expectation for me is like zero. Like I say, I would like to use zero new water. And maybe for me that is the focus. I remember when I heard a question about what happened 10 years ago. In my comparison could be like safety. I remember 15 years ago, the people talk about safety like nice to have, but right now it's a competitive point. So it's say that we have many injuries complicated in the business, in all business, but my expectation for that is could be faster. I think so we don't have a lot of time. So for me, zero is possible in this too. So that is a mixture about the comment before. So sorry for that.
Thank you, Miguel. And Scott, over to you.
I'd just say, and make sure you involve the suppliers in the discussion and really collaborate with them, and also to the brands and retailers. This is not a make a commitment for a year or two and you solve the problem. This is a long term. You have to get down in the weeds. You have to look at things like water meters and how much water is being used, and it's making the investment to actually follow through on the commitments and the guidance is where I think is really critical.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I think we are just about at time. So it remains for me to thank all of our speakers. So Neha, Barry, Scott, and Cora, and also our panelists, Niime and Miguel. And for all of those who posted the question, I think we managed to get through all the questions that were posted on Pathable. This was the second in a series of 4 sessions for Seminar 7. The remaining 2 sessions, which will both be on the topic of corporate water stewardship tools and approaches, will be on Wednesday at 2:30 European time. This is particularly for audiences in the Americas and Europe, and then also on Thursday, 7:30 European time, mainly for our Asian and Australian audiences. There'll be some overlap in speakers, but the topic will be corporate water stewardship tools and approaches, and it will be a super interactive session with breakouts, etc. So thank you all for your participation, much appreciated. Hope you've enjoyed the lively discussion. Enjoy the rest of your day and hope to connect with you again during the Water Week. So that's it for now. See you all again soon.